Hi, this is Terry from Soapworks. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this soap. It ended up being a marbling technique. I'm going to show you how I did that. So let's get started. First I'm adding an ice cube that's frozen distilled water, and then next I add the rest of my water I need in just cold distilled water. I'm using sugar in my water at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils to help my batter stay fluid longer. I add this to my distilled water and I dissolve it completely before I add my lye. Next I'm measuring my sodium hydroxide and then my sodium lactate. And then I add my sodium hydroxide to my distilled water. And then I set this mixture aside. It warms up and I set it aside under my vent fan on my stove to let it cool, and then I will add my sodium lactate when it's cooled. Now I'm measuring my hard oils. So first is coconut oil and then lard. After I measure these, I microwave them until they're melted. Next I measure my liquid oils. First I have avocado oil and then castor oil, and then next I have olive oil. And I have a little squeeze bottle of each of these, so I use that at the end so I don't go over, because sometimes I go over if I'm measuring them all in one container. So that just prevents me from putting in extra and having to try to get it out. Then next I measure my peppermint oil, and then that was pink grapefruit. It was just a fragrance, not an essential oil, because pink grapefruit essential oil doesn't really hold up in cold processed soap, so I wanted to try that combination for cold processed soap, so I decided to use a fragrance. And you saw that I used molten lava neon pigment for the colorant, and then I'm mixing it with a palette knife on a sheet of plexiglass. I added a little olive oil to my colorant to mix it. That olive oil is just adding on to my Superfat. And I only add it just as much as I have to get the mixture wet and to be able to mix it up well. This colorant is a little strong on its own, so I like to tone it down with a little bit of red oxide. I'm using red oxide at a rate of 1/4 teaspoon per pound of oils. Next we have smooth coconut carbon, and it's also called activated charcoal, and all of these colorants I got from Elements Bath & Body. And really, with the coconut carbon you don't need to mix it this way. It's just what I prefer to do, but coconut carbon actually mixes in really well if you just add it to your mixture. It's a little powdery though, so you have to be careful that it doesn't go everywhere. And now that our colorants are prepared, let's prepare our squeeze bottles. Notice that I cut the tops off of the squeeze bottles a little bit, probably just 1/8 inch or so, just to get a little more out at a time. These liners are just the sealed air packaging that you get in your shipments, and I cut the top off of them and I'm just putting them into the squeeze bottles. I got this tip from the Soap Challenge Club from somebody there, and I just found it really helpful. Now our hard oils are melted and it's time to add the liquid oils. And then I add the fragrance. This fragrance combination is known not to speed up, so I probably wouldn't have added this yet unless I knew it was going to behave for me. Okay, my temperatures are between 85 and 95, and I strain my lye mixture into my oils. Next I will weigh the bowl and the contents, and then I will subtract off the weight of the bowl and then divide that number by 2. You totally don't have to do this step, you can just eyeball it when you're splitting the batch in half. Okay, now it's time to just stick blend the mixture until emulsion is reached. That's just when it's not going to separate it anymore. Next, I'm just splitting my batter in half with that number that I calculated before. Okay, now that the batter is divided in half, we just add the colorants. And I add a little at a time of the red just because I don't want it to go too dark. Normally I add the sodium lactate after the lye solution has cooled, but before I add it to the oils, but I forgot, so no big deal. I just added half of it to each of these containers. If you don't know, sodium lactate is a natural hardener and it makes the soap last longer. It makes it release easier from the molds, so that's why I use it. After everything's mixed in, I just add as much as I can to the squeeze bottles. Next, I get the mold ready and I elevate the left side so that the soap doesn't spread out too quickly. I decided that it was easier to pour on the far side of the mold and let it come toward me. So I have that side as the low side and then the side toward me as the elevated side. As the batter started to reach the other end, I took the blocks out and I turned the mold around and propped up that side, and I worked from that end. I wanted these waves of color to be a little irregular and not just stripes, so I started pouring in one corner of the mold. I was trying to get a little more waves in the soap and I got the Lazy Susan out, but it just didn't work, and it really only changed the batter about 1.5 inches in from the edge. So I decided to do a back and forth swirl and then just marble the rest. I really love this glass stirring rod. It works so nicely to swirl and it doesn't want to jump across the bottom like the wood skewers do. It just glides across the bottom. When I'm done with this soap, I put it through gel by covering it up, and I put it on a heating pad and I set it for medium or high. My ambient temperature is around 72 degrees Fahrenheit. In this case, I left the heating pad on for around an hour, because there's so much surface area in a slab mold that it escapes more easily. So that's why I kept it on a little longer than I do with my loaf molds. Once that hour is finished, I just keep it covered up and I don't let it expose to any air for 48 hours, usually at least. And sometimes I just try and forget about it for a little while, because it seems like I always regret it if I take it out of the mold too early. So I like to leave it covered up and go on to another project, and then in a few days I take it out and unmold it. And you can see this got soda ash on it, and I have that problem a lot when I'm using slabs. So I did a little research, so we're going to jump into the What I Learned section. For the soda ash, I looked on Saponification Nation to see what I could find about that with slab molds. And I found out that if you reduce your water, it should be less of a problem, which I already reduced my water quite a bit. I use 25% water as a percentage of oils, and I'm probably going to lower that to about 22 or 20. Also, I found out that low ambient temperature can cause that, and also even a draft, because some of this soda ash even happened when I took it out of the mold and just had it, I was trying to dry it quick so I could do this video, so I had a fan on it and I had it in front of the dehumidifier. So I think having too much of a draft can also cause soda ash. Also, you want your trays to be as thick as possible, which I think it was about as thick as I wanted it for this, but also try to cover it up as quickly as possible after you're finished. You don't want it exposed to air if you don't have to. So by reducing my water and increasing my ambient temperature and covering it, and just having higher temperatures of soap in general, like I usually soap between 85 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, now I might bump it up a little bit and see how that works on my slab molds, because I really like the designs and I want to do more slab molds, but if I keep having trouble with soda ash, it's just not worth it. If you're watching the video here, I used a steamer to try to see if it would take off the soda ash, and it didn't do a very good job, so I had to let it dry and then just plane it off like I planed off the other one. For those of you who aren't familiar with soda ash, it's just that white film that appears on the top, and it's kind of a crystalline structure, but it is chemically soap, so it's nothing to worry about. It's not harmful, but it's just kind of a undesirable appearance, and as soap makers we just try to get rid of it. I also learned that I like pouring the soap into the slab mold on the far side and elevating that side instead of elevating the right side. Because I'm right-handed, it makes it hard to pour on the right wall. I think it would be easier to pour either on the far end or even on the left side and elevating that side. So it's something that I'm going to think about next time I use a tall and skinny mold. I also learned that I didn't really like using the Lazy Susan, and it might have just been because I was swirling it back and forth instead of doing the really fast motion of turning it one way and then stopping quickly. It just seemed like it was actually better to do it on the table. And when using that spinning design and swirling and then stopping really quickly, I think that most of the design happens about 1.5 inches in from the edge of the mold. So I have to think about a different design to accentuate that. And I think I might try doing rays out from the center next time. One more thing I remembered when I was making this soap, and I already knew this, but it was refreshed for me, is that when you use ice cubes in your lye water, it also minimizes the fumes. When you get the fumes, it's not as bad when you use ice in your lye water. So that's just one thing you might want to consider. For all of you who are soap makers, I am guest teaching an Amy Warden's Soap Challenge in the month of July. So if you would like to get my instruction on the technique called pointy layers, you can sign up for her email list so you don't miss it. You don't have to participate in the challenge, you can just receive the tutorial and vote on the winners if you want to. But if you do, it's really a neat thing because you get comments from people all around the world, and it's just so encouraging, and you get to talk to soap makers just all around the world, and it's a wonderful experience. And also Amy has a Facebook group that's good for answering questions. So during the challenge, you can go on there and see what people are talking about, and Amy answers questions, and you get tips and tricks from there, and I've just learned so much from there. If you like these videos and you would like to see more like this, you can subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, and thank you so much for watching.